Perfect. Thank you. I love that song. I love that song. Well, good morning. Happy Memorial Weekend. And Sue, thank you so much for that prayer. That was very touching. I appreciated that. I'm wearing this lei in honor of our capital campaign, which is a sunny beach in Florida where you feel the cool ocean breeze and put your toes in the warm sand that's warmed by the sun. And so the motto is keep cool, stay warm. And you know what that means, a new air conditioner. So that's what this is all about. So more about that later. Today is the last Sunday of the month, and this month we focused on spiritual laws and how to use them. And this morning the subject is, principle is not bound by precedent. You may go, what in the heck is that? Well, I'm here to tell you. The word principle means it's a spiritual law. It's a principle, like gravity. It always works the same, always has worked the same. And a precedent is something that happened in the past, and we grabbed onto it and said, and that's how it's going to happen in the future. It's kind of like closing our mind on our creativity when we set a precedent. But that's what it is. Principle is not bound by our own development of a precedent. A couple weeks ago, I put a handout in your program of the 10 principles. They're spiritual laws that Science of Mind believes very deeply in. They're spiritual laws that don't change, yet they're always at work. Now, I know that when I give you something like that, it's like, whoa, overload. And that only when you're ready to read it and understand it, are you ready? Nobody can force that. So this morning I'm only going to talk about 3 principles. And hopefully in my examples of this, you'll say, oh, hadn't heard it that way before. Maybe today we get a little something new. So that's why if you've been in classes and read the Science of Mind text, you see that Dr. Holmes builds his case on this philosophy this way, and then this way, and then this way, and that way, and finally, about halfway through the book, you go, I get it. Okay, I got that one. And so when I was preparing for this, I went to the Concordance, which is a big book that has every word that's in the Science of Mind textbook by word. So you can look up principle, and it gives you a phrase of what is on that page. And in this book, 3 full pages of principle. Oh boy, okay. Then precedent was about 1 page. So he had a lot to say about principle and precedent. And here's what he wrote. We're surrounded by infinite possibilities like goodness, law, reason, and we express these qualities of God. And as we express them, our faith increases, and we experience the joy of that, the good things that come out of that. Now here we do that through classes and workshops. We develop your skills, and at the same time, the teacher's always developing their own skills because we're working with infinite possibilities in an intelligent way, and that way is through spiritual mind treatment, which is our form of affirmative prayer. So the 3 principles that are really on my daily list of am I living in principle is spiritual laws, love, and freedom. So what are spiritual laws? It's defined like this. Universal spirit maintains harmony, equilibrium and balance through spiritual laws. The laws are impersonal, consistent, and absolute, and they are not bound by any precedent. So for me, the personal application of spiritual laws is, during my day, am I being in harmony? Am I in equilibrium? Am I in balance? And if I feel that way, then I know I'm on the right track. And when I don't feel that way, I'm going against the grain of that spiritual law, and I get the results of that. You know, practitioner training and ministerial training are outstanding for this because we see and talk to people about everything you could ever imagine, both good and not so good. And we develop this ability to kind of see it from God's eyes, so whatever people talk to us about, I stay in equilibrium. If you throw me off my track, I better do my own spiritual mind treatment and come back and talk to you. Because the importance is to stay in harmony with the love of God. So if we can take these principles and like a checklist, sometimes, like a checklist, and say, yeah, I am in alignment with these principles, we have a rock-solid foundation for our life. Rock solid. Now, of course, a principle means we reap what we sow. So if you were really good 2 weeks ago, principles like more of that energy into her life. And then the other day, maybe you weren't so good. Well, here comes some other energy into your life because it's impersonal. The energy attracts like energy. So let's take the principle of love. Love is defined as the self-givingness of God through its desire to express itself in terms of creation. Now, first page of the Bible, and the Word was God. The Word was the creative action that started the whole universe. And we are creations of that one. We are individual expressions of God, individual souls on a journey. So our thoughts have the ability to attract like energy. And that is how we are doing our experience in life. We're attracting like energy. Are we in harmony with the principles? Are we in love with all that we see and do? And I bet there are times you can sit back and go, this experience didn't come from love. It came from some other energy about possibly my judgment of other people, my dislike for some, my complaints about the world. But it's a powerful energy. And Webster defines it as tenderness, warmth, enthusiasm. And we know the opposite is hatred. But I do Tai Chi. And the other day we were doing Dancing with Rainbows. It's a really great thing. This isn't the whole thing, but it's part of it. And I thought, well, that's a good reason to think about love and hate. And where are we? Are we more on this side, neutral here, or are we tending more on this side? And of course, hate is a big word, but maybe judgment's in the middle here. Maybe frustration's here. Maybe anger's here. But we're always dancing between love and hate. And so these principles help us check in with that. Where am I in this dance? And then you can come to Tai Chi and have fun with that. So the third principle that is important to me, and this is a perfect weekend, is freedom. We have the freedom to think however we want to think. We have the freedom to be who we want to be. And no one can take it away from us unless we let them. So when we aren't sure about something, let's say we have an issue that's bothering us and we're not sure about it, we know that God, infinite intelligence, knows all. We know there's always an answer. And so it's our thought that connects with universal intelligence, where all things are known. Now, we have to be receptive. We can't say, oh, God, I really wish I knew about this, but I know there's no answer. No, we have to be receptive. We have to be open. We have to kind of be quiet so we can hear that still small voice within. Or sometimes it's a real loud voice. Sometimes people say, yeah, then this big loud voice came and said, what are you doing? Don't you realize that love is all there is? So there's all these different things to think about. Creation is interesting because there were no flying machines 1,000 years ago. There were no airplanes. But it took people being open to be able to think about a flying machine. I think Leonardo da Vinci was one of the first people that thought about it. It took a long time for it to happen because people had set a precedent that flying was not natural. So it took a long time for aircrafts to really be developed. And the principles of flight don't change, but the engineers' ideas of how to make planes safer, etc. It continues to evolve. Things continue to be created. Ernest Holmes wrote in Living the Science of Mind that advances in science and civilization break down those beliefs that things have to stay the way they were. It's always been that way, if you ever heard that before. Well, I'm so glad to know that because I remember when my father died when I was 10 and my mother had to go to work, and she thought being a secretary would probably be the best thing. So she went out and rented an old manual typewriter, the Royal typewriters where you had to have strong fingers to use them. And she rented one and brought it home and put it on our kitchen table. And for weeks, she was pounding away at the keys because she wanted to get a job as a secretary. And she wanted to work for the Air Force Base, which was nearby. And they had a typing test, and you had to pass the typing test. So she was always working very hard to get faster and faster and faster. Well, I thought this was just an amazing thing. And so I invited all my friends over, and I said, you gotta see my mom work this typewriter because she can do it with her eyes closed. And they went, wow, that was awesome. So we'd all get around, and Mother would type my name, and then she'd close her eyes and be able to do it again, and everybody would just be blown away. So it's one of those good memories that I'm glad we don't have to use Royal typewriters anymore. She worked at that Air Force Base for over 40 years. It was really wonderful. But this set a precedent in her mind that all women should be secretaries, that all women need to learn how to type. And when I went to high school, that was what I was doing, taking office practice classes. Because in our family, girls didn't go to college, so we need to have something to fall back on. And she said, if you can be a secretary, you can get a job anywhere. So she was thinking about my security as a person in adulthood, if I ever needed to get another job. So when I graduated, I got hired immediately by an insurance company to type insurance contracts all day long. These are legal page insurance contracts, 6 to 10 pages long, and you could not make one mistake. One mistake, psh. There were no copiers then. There was no whiteout, and you couldn't use whiteout anyway, but you had one mistake, that was it. So I got really, really good at typing. And this is, of course, before copiers. Fast forward 20 years, and computers came into being. And I remember I was working for Crown Zellerbach, and the vice president said, computers, they're just a trend. No one is going to have a computer on their own desk. It was a department computer. Well, you know, that didn't last long because it escalated so fast. It was the most wonderful thing in the world. But I felt bad about my mom. They gave her a computer, and she threatened to quit. She said, you either give me my IBM Selectric typewriter back or I'm out of here. And, you know, they were very kind and gave her special training, et cetera, and she eventually learned it. But I knew, you know, the precedent in her mind, this is how life works. This is my life. And you throw something like a computer into the works, and it was very hard for her. So I was researching this week. I was having fun with this topic because it sounded a little dry. When people think things always have to stay the same, I want to know how many of you have heard the Great Horse Manure Crisis of 1894. One? This was a crisis, a horse manure crisis, 1894. Google it because it's fascinating reading. You know, at that time, horses were the only modes of transportation. And by 1894, the horse population was so huge, it was a problem all around the world, especially in cities, because horses had uncomfortable, unpleasant consequences like urine running down the street and flies and congestion and horse carcasses. I never thought of that. But the main problem was manure. A horse produces 20 to 30 pounds of manure a day. In 1898, The first International Urban Planning Conference was held for 10 days in New York City. People came in from all over the world. Unfortunately, the topic that dominated the discussion was horse manure. And after 3 days of these top people discussing horse manure problems, no one could even come close to thinking of a solution. And so after 3 days, they shut down the conference. I was surprised at that. I thought there had to be better minds at that. But in other areas of the world, people had their thinking hat on. They were thinking outside the box. But 2 years after that disastrous conference that only lasted 3 days, London was the largest city in the world, and it had 11,000 horse-drawn carriages. Several thousand, they called them buses, but it required 12 horses to pull them. There were thousands of carts, wagons, taking people and goods all over the city. And then people started making dire predictions. You know how it is when there's a crisis. Here was the prediction. By 1950, London would be buried under 9 feet of manure. Aren't we glad the predictors are usually wrong? So here in the US in 1900, New York City's human population was about 200,000, and the horse population was 100,000. There was a horse for every 2 people. So I got my little calculator out as I'm reading this, and they produce 20 to 30 pounds of manure, take the average, and that's over 1,300 tons of horse manure a day dumped on the streets of New York. No wonder it was a problem. And so I'm calculating that versus our semi-trucks that go up and down the highway that carry 25 tons of product, and it would be 53 semi-truckloads of manure every day. And it's mind-boggling. And then the urine, the 20 pounds of urine. It was horrible because ladies at that time wore long skirts that dragged the ground. Oh, I know, it's horrible. And then I think about, a horse needs a place to sleep, and they have a horse stall. How much property was used for 100,000 horse stalls in New York City? It's just an amazing thing. So I'm really grateful for human creativity. There is nothing in nature that prohibited us from having electric light bulbs 1,000 years ago, but thinking outside the box. And I would say that 100,000 horses in a city of 200,000 was a good enough reason to start thinking outside the box. So if you like researching like I do on the internet, the story of gasoline engines is very fascinating, because once the idea surfaced of a horseless carriage, brains went to work. The Italians were the first one to put together an internal combustion engine in 1853. Now, this is way before the crisis, but it didn't go anywhere. It didn't really go anywhere. Their patent that was approved was titled Obtaining Motive Power by the Explosion of Gases. Sounds like a very boring read to me. In America in 1893, the first gasoline-powered buggy was made in Springfield, Massachusetts, by brothers Charles and Frank Duryea. They bought a horse-drawn buggy for $70, and they put a 4-horsepower single-cylinder engine on it. Now, I can imagine how that probably looked when you put an engine on a horse-drawn carriage, because it has 4 wheels. How do you get them all to move at the same time? Do you have enough pressure? All this thing. But anyway, they won a prize at the Chicago Fair for that. And so they were very excited. So then they put rubber on the wheels. That was very exciting. Then there was an automobile race, the first one in the country, and they won it. So they got very into this. And in 1896, they built 13 identical automobiles called Duryeas after their name. They were the first American company to manufacture more than one automobile at a time. 100,000 horses, one automobile. Okay, we got a ways to go here. But things rapidly advanced. Can you imagine once you opened the box on that idea? It was amazing. So, 1908, Ford Motor Company came out with a Model T. and the world just went crazy. And it wasn't very long before they were mass producing them on an assembly line, so they were making more than one car a day. It was really great. So another area where principle is not bound by precedent is war. Some people still believe that countries like the Palestinians and the Israelis are never going to get it, never going to reach peace. The Sunnis and the Shiites, never going to happen. The precedent was set many thousands of years ago. It can't be impossible. It can't. It can't. It's going to take a lot of love, a lot of effort, a lot of understanding, but it cannot be impossible. Just because they've always been at war is not a precedent for changing it. Through spiritual principles, through love, through freedom, through respect for every individual. Another area where we often confuse precedent with and principle is in prayer. For so long, people would say, well, God must have been busy today, didn't answer my prayer. Well, maybe he was mad at me. I don't know. Did I do something wrong? Maybe there's just not enough to go around and I'm asking too much. Thank God for Ernest Holmes, discovering the power in affirmative prayer, what we call spiritual mind treatment. It's not that God was too busy. It's that prayer, like anything else, operates on a principle. If it's negative, guess what? It shows up negative, or it shows up as nothing. But if it's affirmative and positive in the way he laid it out, it's extremely powerful. We're dealing with a power that is not bound. It's the power that created the whole universe. And we all have access to it through our mind. Here, we give a lot of classes on this in many different ways. It's kind of like the science of mind. You get a class on this, and then you get a class on that, and then you take one like this. And I am amazed sometimes after 4 classes or so, someone would go, I got it, I got it, I got it. And it's being receptive. It's being open to the information. There's a person, Sheer Matthews, shared this with me after I talked about this young man. She said she actually met him several months ago in a DreamWorks class or conference in San Francisco. Here's someone who saw a problem and knew that there had to be a way to solve it. And his name is Boyan Slat, Boyan Slat. He's a 23-year-old Dutch gentleman, inventor, who started building engineering projects when he was 2 years old. Can you imagine? I'm sure it was Tinker Toys or something, but I don't know, too, but they saw the talent in him. And he impressed the world when he was awarded a Guinness Book of World Records certificate when he was 14 years old for simultaneously launching 213 water rockets. This kid's got an imagination. In 2011, he was skydiving, skin diving underwater in Greece, and he observed more plastic in the water than fish. And it disturbed him greatly. And he made a commitment to himself right then and there. He was going to do something about it. He decided to devote all his time to getting plastic out of the ocean into recycling. And so 2 years later, he founded this company, the Ocean Cleanup Project. If you haven't heard about it, please check it out. He did a TED Talk on this, and the world was just so excited about his idea that he was given enough money to do a test project in the waters near Japan, and it worked. And so his company is now focused on the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. If you haven't heard of it, it's a bunch of garbage and plastic in the ocean that right now is twice the size of Texas. They're launching their first cleanup of the garbage patch this month, May. It's very exciting. And they hope to have full-scale operations going by 2020 and to have half of the garbage patch cleaned up in 5 years. What a mind, what a mind. How many people said, can't do anything about it. Let's just ignore it. And then came this young man. It's just a wonderful story. Principle is not bound by precedent. There is no law, precedent, I said that before, it's precedent. There is no law in the universe that seeks to perpetuate old limitations. This law, this spiritual law, responds to our minds, to what we are focused on, whether it's love or less than love. So it's important to have an enthusiastic attitude about life because we're in control of our life. And this is why I want to thank you for being here this morning. I know it's a beautiful day after a couple days of rain. But Reverend Sue and I assume you're here to expand your knowledge of spiritual principles. You're here to expand your knowledge of how your life can be even better, more improved, how you can be a source of love in the world. Each Sunday, it takes 3 or 4 days to write a talk, and what we try to do is put in some tidbits that so when you walk out of here, you can say, I got this one. Didn't get it all, but that's okay. But if you got one thing that will help you in your life, we're just grateful. And that's why we do this work. When I opened the Science of Mind Thursday to look up principles, pages of principles and precedents, I found this one thing, and I said to myself, I bet I've never read this page before. But I bet Chris Johnson has, and if I told him the page number, he'd know what was on that page because he's memorized that book. I had to laugh at that. But the page is called The Final Conclusion. Did you know there was one page called The Final Conclusion in that book? I didn't know. He wrote, what the world needs is spiritual conviction, followed by spiritual experience. Holmes said, I would rather see students of this science prove its principles than to have them repeat all the beautiful words that have ever been uttered. It's easier to teach the truth than it is to practice it. Because the practice is personal to each one of us. In the long run, no one can live or run our lives except us. So he ended, to each is given what is needed, and the gifts of heaven come alike to all. The question is how we use these gifts. That's all that matters. So this week I invite you to think about areas of your life, just one, where you could apply a principle and positively impact that. And then look at it and go, I'll be darned, that was easy. That was really easy. And then take another one. Just little baby steps. Take another one. Something that you heard today that, I've had this idea about this, and I never thought of that before. Now here comes another idea. I'm open, I'm receptive, and these ideas just keep coming in, and I start to see there's an answer, there's a way. It's not impossible. That's true spiritual evolution happening in your life. And it can happen every day. So let's pray about that. Thank you, Judy. The first spiritual principle is oneness. That it is all one, that there's only one thing going on here, the creative energy of God that has created everything, that has created each one of us, and given us the power and the ability to shape our lives how we want to shape it. It's the good news. Dancing with rainbows on the left side of life. It's the good news. So I know for myself, as well as everyone here, that when I focus on that good news, when I focus on principle, when I focus on equilibrium, being in harmony, my day flows, and it is beautiful. I accept that for everyone here, and all those that aren't here, that will hear about this one way, shape, or form when they go to page 423 in the Science of Mind and go, I never read that before. It's true. It's real, and it's powerful. I give such great thanks for Ernest Holmes and the years he took to synthesize all these truths and put them in this book that we study so hard, and watch our lives change because of that. And how we learn affirmative prayer and how it not only impacts us but everyone around us, bringing everyone into more harmony and love together. So in immense gratitude, I release all these words because they're just words, but the energy is there to accept or reject, to say yes, to say no, because we are totally free. And this Memorial Weekend, I am so grateful for that freedom. It is a precious gift, not only in mind, but in this country and how we live our life. So I release these words to the rainbows in the world, the rainbows of love that twinkle at us and remind us how precious this life is. And I let it go, knowing it is so, and so it is. Thank you.